Hello and welcome back, Smart RV podcast friends and family, fans the world over. Welcome to 2026. This is Joe Symmes coming to you live pre-recorded from southern Mississippi, enjoying a nice warm winter. However, my co-host John Vanek is in the frigid northern Nevada. John, how is the weather there in mid-January, sir?
Well, actually, it's not as frigid as we would like it to be.
Oh no.
It's been pretty cold. So in the shade, we still have some snow on the ground here and there from about 3 weeks ago. So it's been cold. That's good. But we've had basically zero precipitation since right before New Year's. Right after Christmas, we had a good snowfall, and so it's great weather for working. Not the best for winter sports, as some of our listeners know, and one of my favorite pastimes is ice climbing in the wintertime, frozen waterfalls, things like that. And yeah, just not so much of that happening quite now. We need a good cold storm, and unfortunately, I guess we should say we're not getting any of the big storm that's about to rip right through the middle of America and impact like 2 million people here, right? And you're going to be on the lower edge of that, I think.
Yes, that's correct. We're looks like we're gonna dodge the worst of it. We're actually below the kind of the bad stuff there, like you said, in mid central US. But we're gonna drop down here. It's been unseasonably warm, but we're gonna drop down. I've got a couple customers asking me what do we do when it gets below freezing, for that 2 or 3 hours right before daylight.
Yep. Yeah, there you go. 2 or 3 hours before daylight. Well, it's great to be back. We did take a little bit of a hiatus over the holidays, and Joe was doing some cool international travel, and I was like looking for ice to climb, and that wasn't happening. But we're back and looking forward to an exciting 2026, and we've got a lot of great things to be chatting about here, both today and in our continuing episodes. As many of you know, quite often we open up with what we call Beside the Pedestal. And these are tips, tricks, and information that all RVers should be aware of. They're pretty simple ideas. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, because it is wintertime, furnace maintenance, or what
Furnace
should
maintenance,
be,
I love it.
yeah, or maybe an annual service or an inspection just to look through things. And uh,
Well,
you know,
so let me ask you some questions, John, since
oh, go ahead. Okay.
obviously by geography you end up being the main furnace guru. Even this time of year, I touch them some, dabble a little, but let me give you some of my real basics, but then I'm going to give you the heavy duty questions. So, I want to remind our listeners for Beside the Pedestal segment, maintenance. It's motherhood and apple pie. It's always good to do. Ounce of prevention, pound of cure, all that kind of stuff. So I tell my customers down here with a furnace system, one of the main things you should do, especially with pets, is keep the area in and around clean, keep the floor clean. There's an intake that does not have a filter, and none of them on the market today are designed to be filtered. That would restrict airflow. So the best thing you can do is keep a nice clean floor, try and minimize the pet hair that might gather around the intake there. And same thing, obviously, for the ducts coming out of the floor. No rugs over those. Want to make sure air can get in and get out of the furnace. And the last
And
thing,
Joe, before you move on, Joe, what would
yeah.
happen if you had rugs or carpets or plant plant pots? I mean, we find all sorts of stuff in RVs
Yeah.
today, particularly among our full-time RVers. But what would happen or could happen if you are accidentally covering any of your discharge vents or ducts?
So yeah, what I explain to my customers is restricted airflow, and that is harmful, very harmful for a furnace system in several different ways. It is a propane burner and is designed to heat up, get real hot in the burn chamber. And ironically, if it doesn't have enough airflow, it can get too hot, which can cause all sorts of damage to the mechanism, can potentially, in a catastrophic scenario, create a fire hazard. But you need to get cool air, at least fresh air in. and through that burn chamber to remove the heat. And obviously, it comes out, the byproduct there, the burn chamber is what we're looking for to heat the air. So the main thing is to keep that burn chamber cool enough to keep running. They're not designed to light off and have stagnant air inside of them. They'll burn themselves up.
Yes, they will. And as well, and Joe, go ahead and briefly describe how the forced air furnace works in an RV, in
Yeah.
relation to the propane air mixture, how that runs through versus where is the hot air coming from?
Okay. No
How is the hot
problem.
air created?
Yeah, you'll have right in generally, I think everyone I've ever seen directly in front of the furnace will be the intake. And 90% of the time on RVs, these will be under a couch cabinet, some sort of a structure that you can hide something sitting on top of the floor, but inside of an enclosed area. They won't be out in the open, in other words. And there'll be a small opening in the cabinetry below that where it'll suck interior air into the burn chamber. There's a squirrel cage fan then that'll pull that air in and flow it through the burn chamber by passing by the gas valve first.
Excuse
And
me.
what the gas,
I'm sorry, meaning over the burn chamber, not
yes,
through the burn chamber.
yes, sorry. I guess technically an air-to-air heat exchanger. So there's a propane line connect to a gas valve with igniter, and so that lights off, creates a flame, and makes a hot area of the burn chamber. The air that gets sucked in passes over and around that, and again, an air-to-air exchange where the intake air never mixes with the burn itself, but becomes heated due to conductive heat transfer, I guess, between the two metal um, sheet metal surfaces.
There you go. Yep. Just want to so the important thing that we have to be aware of as part of our maintenance, servicing, inspection, or whenever we're working on a furnace is, and we want our listeners to understand, is that the propane is the propane gases are totally contained within the burn chamber and are pushed out through the exhaust vent outside of your rig. And the warm air that is flowing inside your rig is clean air that has passed over this really hot burn chamber. That's how it gets hot. So this is why it's designed so there's no chance of propane gases or the residue of the burn entering the RV, and that's where in a kind of dangerous case, if you have a crack in your burn chamber, then you could have propane gases and the burn gases coming out of your tank and being pushed into your RV. And that's why it's always important to keep your LP, your carbon monoxide, and also in a different way, your fire alarms. Make sure that those are operative every year.
Yeah, excellent point, John. And that's why, again, sometimes customers will ask, hey, when I light up my furnace, maybe I'm doing something wrong because on the outside, I got a bunch of hot air spraying out. I'm
There
sure
you
you've gotten
go.
that question.
Yeah, yep, and exactly, and that's the hot air coming out of the burn chamber. That's what we don't want going inside. Yep,
Yeah, that's the exhaust. It needs to breathe. That's dirty hot air, if you will. It's got the carbon residue from the burn cycle.
yep, yep. So we keep the dirty air going out, and we keep the nice warm air coming in.
Yeah, so you won't have this issue up there in your climate, but down in the south, we have a lot of flying insects, even in the winter, and dirt daubers, mud daubers, depending on what part of the south you're from, are famous for building nests inside this heat exchange. I'm sorry, air exchange, like we were just talking about. So again, the burn chamber has an intake, the burn chamber, and an exhaust. So that's why, depending on the models, you'll see two separate holes or a tube inside of a tube and one hole. But either way, if a mud dauber builds his nest in there, and I've had several here recently, it can restrict the flow of air. And I even had one customer that was complaining, yeah, my trailer doesn't get real hot, and I see black sooty air coming out the outside. As soon as I pulled up that was a symptom. As soon as I pulled up in the truck, I looked right at the exhaust and noticed no mud dauber screens. And so, right where my mind went to then.
And did you find some mud dauber evidence?
Yes, yes, we did. So, as John and I learned in our training, mud daubers not only happen by there because it's a nice, quiet, enclosed, small space like they like anyway, but they are also attracted to the smell of ethyl mercaptan. And so, if you're old enough, you'll understand the joke. This is not to be confused with ethyl mercat, but this is ethyl mercaptan, which is, for laymen, the rotten egg smell they add to propane so that we can detect it.
So that's a really important thing because the mud daubers can build nests, and in really extreme cases, they can build huge nests inside the burn chamber, and it requires an extensive removal of the furnace and cleaning out the burn chamber. It can become quite a big thing. Now, a lot of people put screens over the vents for their furnaces to prevent mud daubers getting inside. And we should just, make sure everybody understands that while a lot of RV owners use them, a lot of owners need to use them. Technically, they might be adding those screens because they could be reducing airflow, could lead to the manufacturer of the furnaces, primarily Dometic or Suburban, with not honoring warranties. Now, of course, the warranties
Exactly.
expires, so, do that as you will, but just, a good piece of information to know on a new unit. Um, uh, and somebody asks, then, that could be a warranty issue.
Exactly. The manufacturers don't trust any type of restrictions because these devices are so airflow sensitive. Manufacturers don't want anything changed, nothing that isn't stock. So, adding any type of a screen, as John was saying, will usually void a warranty or cause a problem in coverage or whatnot. However, sometimes warranties expire, sometimes it's worth it. This is a owner education, and I allow my customers to make their own decisions once they're fully aware and fully armed with all the knowledge they need. But I can say again down here, it's not a matter of if, but when. I've found probably at least 80 to 90% of my calls with a furnace problem and I diagnose as restricted airflow have a mud dauber nest or two inside.
Well, there you go. And again, talk the airflow through the system without, and we talked a lot about furnaces because they're important, particularly in wintertime. And there's a lot of potential kind of misinformation or misdiagnoses offered on a lot of Facebook forums and things like that. So we've talked about this in the past, but to reiterate, that airflow is so critical, and the system it has different ways of making sure there is adequate airflow. And one of the things that is inspected during an annual inspection, service maintenance, however you want to call it, is the is how well the motor is performing. Because if motors go bad, they can actually run too high of an RPM. That can cause sporadic functioning of your furnace, or if it is running too slowly, it will not it might not actually even ignite, it might not stay ignited. So again, while this is a different thing than mud daubers, the importance of understanding airflow and not having any restrictions by covering up vents and things like that. So
So,
that's
John, as an electrical guy, I know the answer to your question, but I'm going to set you up here. You have a great way. I love this method. How do you, as a technician, in relatively short order, determine how well this motor is performing?
well, it's pretty darn easy. You take your amp meter, your amp clamp, meter with an amp clamp, and you put it over the red wire that is running off of your control board and going to the motor. And depending on the model and make of your furnace, you should probably be somewhere around 9 to 10 amps running when your motor is running. And that's one of the first things, whenever I get furnace issues, that's one of the first things I check, because literally, and we're going to talk about this in detail a little bit longer in a few minutes here. But when you pull off that exterior access panel, that wire is like right in your face. And it
Yeah.
literally takes about 10 seconds if the furnace is running, put the amp clamp on, and now we've ascertained whether our motor is functioning properly at that time.
So that 9 to 10 amps, that's gold. That is a key fact and figure to pass to our viewers. So, what then, using a little electrical knowledge, what would it be telling us if we had like 5 or 6 amps?
Well, then it's the motor's not running fast enough. So the squirrel cage, the air flow wheels are not running fast enough. So that means the furnace, if it ignites, and it might not ignite because it might not be pushing enough air to close the infamous sail switch.
The sail switch. I
The
knew we
sail
were going to
switch.
get the sail switches.
There you
Everybody
go.
loves a good sail switch.
So it might not close the sail switch, and the furnace might not come at all on at all. It could come on and then not maintain the sail switch closed. If it does close because there's not enough air moving, it could overheat and shut down because you have a high temperature limit switch that could be triggered as a safety device. If the furnace gets too hot, that could open up. So there's a lot of things that are related. Again, all it comes back to airflow. And again, if you happen to have an amp clamp and you're looking at your furnace, make sure you just go ahead and do some research online. You should be able to find out what the proper amp draw should be for your furnace, your particular make and model of furnace, because there is some variation there. But in general, you're looking, typically, 9 to 10 amps. So the other important thing that is also related to this is during an annual maintenance is to try and vacuum out or wipe out any of the dust and anything that is blown into the furnace area from the outside of the rig. It's a little counterintuitive, but technically, um, the if you have an exterior access panel and you pull that off, you're going to be seeing your motor wire, you're going to see your sail switch or the wires going to the sail switch. You're probably going to have a view of your control board. And most of us would think like this is the front of your furnace. In
No.
fact, technically, it is the back of your furnace. And on the front of the furnace, which would be more on the inboard side of your RV, that's where you're going to find your high temperature limit switch. So, a lot of dust and dirt can get in there, and you want to have access to it. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that because when we get to our calls of the week, I have a call I want to share with our listeners that is going to make you furious if you don't have something and make you very grateful if you do have something. So there's a little tease. But
Oh, I love that. Love that.
so, but before we move on, an interesting thing, and we encourage our listeners you can always send us an email asking us questions about RV travel, RV life, RV systems, being an RV tech, what you should expect if you are working with RV technicians. But also, it's interesting, Joe and I have been in business for the exact same length of time. We met during training and certification. And obviously, where we live, we always talk about our locations and our different weather patterns and things. But partly because of that, but also for some very unknown reasons, Joe and I end up handling, it seems like we've just sort of fallen into different patterns of the various types of work we do, or that just simply comes our way. So Joe, I think one of your calls of the week here, we'll start off as something you're going to talk about a hydronic system you were working on, correct?
Yeah, John, thank you for that. Yeah, I want to remind listeners that a lot of mobile RV techs um, end up being a mile wide and a few inches deep on a lot of things. In other words, you need to be a jack of all trades. Occasionally, techs will try and specialize in certain areas, but a lot of technicians, at least in this area, take on many different kind of projects, and so it's important to understand the breadth. And it's kind of one of the fun things, honestly, about this business is you get to move on. You may do an HVAC call in the morning, a water heater call in the afternoon. You may be doing some exterior sealing the next day, or by late night, a slide that's stuck out or something. So it's a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different skill sets. But having said all that, it's very interesting the variety of calls. And so yes, John and I, for all of our different exact same training and similar skills and interests, different geography have resulted in many different calls. I've had within the past 48 hours, I've done 3 different calls on hydronic heating systems, 2 different aquahot calls, and 1 Oasis call. There's 2 or 3 others on the market, but those are the 2 major ones.
Joe, Joe's as a point of reference, I received my first call about an aquahot system in a year and a half.
Wow.
Haven't heard anything about it, and it was a year and a half since I last discussed or talked to anybody about an aquahot or an Oasis hydronic system, and get the phone call, "Hey, we need our aquahot service." And you do these all the time.
Yeah, and so it's John and I were comparing notes offline the other day, and it's interesting that same principle kind of holds true. I've done more than a dozen, probably, or 2 dozen if you count all the different types of slide systems, and probably more than a dozen Schwintech errors or codes. And I don't think you've handled nearly that many slides, have you, John?
No, no, and actually, and most of the slides that I've worked on have all been BAL or about AccuSlides, cable slides.
Yeah, and
Why
so
is the difference?
specifically,
Who knows?
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
right.
I've had I've had maybe 2 cable slide calls, and they were. I don't think even the great John Vanek could have fixed one of them. It was higher level of care is what you need, sir. Mobile RV tech is not necessarily the right venue to be pulling out slides and completely rebuilding. Major systems.
Limitations. There are
Right, right.
limitations. Although there are mobile techs, that work in the field and do remove slides, do full
Right,
repairs, do
right.
replacements. Again, to emphasize what you were mentioning, within the tech community. It's one of the great things about this job is you can really decide exactly what you want to do and what you don't want to do, or you're not capable of because of working space or equipment or time. But anyway, tell
Yeah.
us about the hydronic system that you worked on this week. What was the call?
Yeah, great question. So the Oasis system, they similar to an Aquahot, they have pumps that move the um, heat transfer fluid. It's technically, I think that's what they like to refer to it, the coolant, if you will, in and around through the system. And eventually, like all mechanical things, those pumps can wear out, go bad. And one of them was relatively straightforward pump replacement. So was able to tackle that. And it's a little bit bigger job, can be intimidating. I really struggled the first time I did one, but now that, again, been in business a little while and starting to see some calls over and over, I was able to jump right in and, I know exactly what tools I need to bring out for this. Bought a couple of specialized different kind of pliers from the first time, so you're not just using your standard hand pliers, but actual spring clamp pliers and things like that. Some specifically designed hose pinchers to act as hose clamps, and really reduces the messiness, because when you get to replacing a fluid pump, there's plumbing involved, obviously, and so you've you either drain the entire system or figure out a way to stop all the heat transfer fluid from gurgling out while you're swapping the 2 pumps. So it can be a bit messy there, and you're always inside deep in a storage compartment when you're working on this. And of course, there's the electrical wiring side to get power to these electric pumps. So it covers 2 or 3 disciplines.
There you go. And I guess we should back up just a bit for some of our listeners who might not be familiar with what a hydronic system is. So in
Yes.
20 seconds, give us a 20-second description of what a hydronic system does.
Yeah, thank you. I should have started out with that maybe. So again, like I was saying, there's Aquahot and Oasis are kind of some of the big name brands. There's Timberline and a couple others, but essentially for you homeowners, especially older homes, will understand when I say it's similar to a boiler system in a house. Effectively, you have a heat chamber that heats up fluid mixture, heat transfer fluid with a bunch of antifreeze in it, so you don't necessarily have to winterize that part of the systems. And then you have different coils that come through with uh, potable water and some other heat exchange fluid. The coils or heat exchangers mix through this big heated burn chamber and can then carry the hot fluid to various places. So the reason you're probably at this point going, what in the world is he talking about? Is this a water heater or a furnace? The answer is yes. it
Yes,
it's
and yes.
it's popular in RVs because it can do both. Once you have a heated container of hot fluid, then you can do a lot of different things with it. You can heat domestic hot water for consumption, for showering, dishes, whatever. The other thing you can do is heat up transfer fluid and some, not just water in this case, but transfer fluid and send it throughout the coach. So a lot of times it's used for zone heating in the front and rear sections of the coach. You'll have little heat exchangers in the floor, and it's a different type of furnace, basically. You're using hot fluid to come to a small heat exchanger in the floor where there's a small 12-volt muffin fan, like a computer fan, that blows across the heat exchanger and transfers the heat from the warm fluid to the air.
There we
So
go.
it's kind
Just
of
like a
a
furnace.
backup, yeah, backup or redundant type furnace. But on some of the higher end models, there's an additional option then, which is an engine heater, preheater. And that really does some cool stuff. They run a loop through the engine's cooling system. And what that allows you to do is you can move heat either way then. So if you've been camping for a long time in the frigid north in the wintertime and you're getting all prepared and getting ready to get underway because it's a travel day, you can use your hydronic heating system after your morning shower. When you're all done and ready to get going, you can flip that on and it'll start sending some warm fluid to the engine block to start preheating your big diesel engine and reducing the number of cold starts. Many diesel manufacturers define cold start as anything below 70 degrees. So you don't necessarily have to be in the super frigid. It can be 50-degree morning and it's still a little more wear and tear than a lot of people realize on a big diesel. So a lot of large diesel pushers will use these as an engine preheater. And since that system's there, all you have to do is run the same system, same pump, same everything, but run it in the other direction maybe at the end of a long travel day. You've been driving all day, your big diesel bus engine, in the rear is nice and hot. You get to the campground and you shut the engine down and you'd like to have dinner, do the dishes, maybe take a shower. You can use that same preheating system runs the other direction and can siphon heat off of the big, heavy, warm, very warm engine block and kind of preheat your boiler tank then so that you can take a hot shower almost instantly with the free heat from the engine.
There you go. I mean, in some respects, the system is pretty simple, but like most other things, and sometimes it's kind of complex. But for our listeners, how often should your hydronic system, Aquahot, Oasis, Timberline, no matter what you have, how often should they be looked at or inspected? And what are just like a couple of major points that are involved in that annual inspection or maintenance?
Well, again, very important question there because there is an annual maintenance requirement. There's ironically a little different 3-year requirement and a different yet 5-year requirement. So there's 1, 3, and 5-year maintenance cycles that each of them undergo. And a trained technician will know the very scope. Basically, the 3-year is the 1 year plus a couple more filters, and the 5-year is the 3-year plus a couple more electrodes and sensors and things like that. So you kind of scale up in importance and little preventative maintenance, replacing igniters and things like that before they fail. But essentially, you have an annual maintenance requirement that needs to be done on each of them every year. But maybe even more importantly than that, um, since these systems, you can heat the boiler, heat chamber there in several different ways. Some of them are propane powered, many of them are diesel powered, again, popular in a big diesel pusher, but all of them also have a backup electric element to heat the boiler. And so folks will a lot of times say, oh, this is great. I've got electric water heater, in other words, and I'm in a campground with plenty of free or prepaid for electricity. I'm going to do that. But this diesel burner it's kind of like a small diesel engine. It just doesn't have a reciprocating piston in it, so it still needs to be run. And each of the manufacturers recommend monthly running of the diesel side.
Okay, good to know. So, hey, if you guys are anywhere near Gulfport, Mississippi, make a phone call to Joe at Fixin RV and have your hydronic system checked out. That's one of
Yeah,
those things that a lot of owners don't have checked out. it's good insurance because if it starts to fail, you could be without hot water, you could be without heat. Any final
You,
thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, quick plug on that. There's some techs you can find them on the internet who really dig in deep and specialize and do nothing but these systems, and those guys are phenomenal. But obviously, few and far between, and can be hard to catch, and maybe even not at all during the summertime. It's a popular winter sport, if you will. um, a lot of really good, I'll define them as really good dealerships and brick and mortar repair facilities will work on them, but not all. And so it's not necessarily super difficult, but it is super specialized kind of RV repair and maintenance work. And definitely seek out a trained technician. Both Aquahot and Oasis offer training classes and certifications, so that's always an important thing to look for.
And again, to stress this point is that it can be a challenge to find a good technician who is trained and familiar and experienced with these hydronic systems. So don't, if you have one, it is just not the type of system that you can expect most techs to be able to jump into and handle. So kind of be thinking about the future and when and where you're going to be, and then start looking for a technician that can handle these.
Yeah,
So moving
absolutely.
on so moving on to my call of the week, first one, and, these are a little bit simpler, but, um, I get a furnace call. Furnace the motor comes on, but it's not heating. Okay, alright, so I'm going out there, and it's not uncommon that trailers will, have where the exhaust port is, pushing out the propane air on the outside. Um, it's not always common to find an access panel. Sometimes you will just have one or two vents that are either, if you have one, it's just going to be blowing out the hot air from the burn chamber, as we discussed. If there's two ports, one above the other, um, you're going to, or side by side, that could be an air intake and an exhaust. But typically, hopefully, you're going to find a panel. Usually it's black or white. It's about 20 inches by 8 inches, 4 screws, and that is the exterior access panel. And if you were to unscrew those screws, and now you've opened it up, and now you're looking at what we talked about earlier, the back of the furnace. You can see your sail switch, you see your motor wires, you see the control board. Got a lot of stuff right there in front of you, super easy access and super helpful when you're trying to diagnose issues. Now
And
it's
just
not
let me jump in, John, just to kind of remind listeners and make sure people are tracking along with what you're saying. This is a furnace appliance is what we're talking about here, and it's not going to be up high. Well, let me start with the real basics. It's not going to be on the roof, not going to be in the basement necessarily. It's not going to be on the very front of the RV or probably very back. So it's on the walls, on the sides. It's not going to be high on the walls. It's going to be low because they're mounted on floor level.
Yep.
And generally, correct me if I'm wrong, what I've always seen is closest to midships, kind of in the center. Occasionally they'll be kind of maybe towards the rear. I don't think I've ever seen one at the extreme front.
Well, they can be anywhere, but yeah, I think more often than not, they're going to be, like you said, midships. As a naval guy, and our other naval guys will recognize that term. But in this particular case, the exhaust port was actually on the rear wall. Okay, so they can be all the way back, and this was a 28 to 30-foot-ish travel trailer. So
And just to be clear, they can be vertical or horizontal, like a portrait or landscape oriented, right?
correct. Yep,
Okay.
exactly. All right. So anyway, this does not have an access panel. Okay, that makes it a little bit more difficult because typically now you're going to have to remove a big vent, and then kind of climb in and start undoing things to pull the furnace out so you can get to the side where all the controls are. You're really talking about bench testing and the furnace at that point. Well, in this particular case, and I'm going to insert a photograph here for our listeners. Please, take a look at it. But the vent is removed. You can see the opening. You can see the silver the sheet metal box that the furnace core sits in. And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is the side of the bed frame of the bed in the master bedroom. And there's a panel on the side of the bed frame there, and you physically cannot remove the furnace because there's not enough room. And
Wow.
this drives techs crazy. And it
And
also
just to be
drives
clear, this is how the manufacturer built it.
they chose to build it in a way that you could not get the furnace out. And because there is no exterior access panel, you can't do anything from the outside. Absolutely infuriating.
Wow.
So we had like three different options here. The first would have been to cut in the outside wall, and this is pretty easy to do if you're really handy, or you can hire a tech. There's nothing technical about it. You just need to be very careful in how you measure and place everything. But you cut that hole in the exterior wall, and now you have access, and then you reinstall the frame and a new access panel. So now you have the panel that we all wish the manufacturer had installed in the first place. That was one option.
And so you can buy these panels aftermarket, you're saying?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can buy them retail. Obviously, as a tech, we get them wholesale, and we know how to install them. Um, the second option, uh, I found a colleague. What they did is they cut a hole in that side panel along the bed frame, and they cut a hole that kind of matches the hole where the furnace cabinet is. So then they were able to pull the furnace through that, across that little 13-inch space, pull it basically into the bed frame itself, and then lift it out.
Wow. So
Um,
you're reaching inside of a hole to reach in the hole.
yes. And you end up with a very difficult hole to replace. When you're done, you want to put that panel back, and now you don't have any support. You're going to have to build support for that hole that you've just cut in that wood paneling. What we opted to do was go in a little bit farther towards the head of the bed, and in a spot where nobody will ever see it. And we just made a vertical cut down that panel, and I removed ends up being about 4 feet, 3.5 or 4 feet of panel. I removed the whole panel from the side of the bed. That allowed me to pull the furnace out, and then after we made the repairs, put the furnace back in, and then reattach
Wow.
that whole panel, and it just leaves a small cut line, again, that nobody will see unless you get down on your hands and knees and stick your head around the corner of the bed. And the owner was good with that. That was the option that the owner chose, because that was much faster and more cost effective at this time than to go into the cutting of the outside skin. And this was a stick and tin RV, so it had an aluminum wall. So we cut through that, and there's actually two pieces of plywood that we would also need to cut out. So, there would have been time and expense in both for the cost of the panel itself, and then for all that cutting. And the absolute crazy part of this is that it needed a new control board. And had that panel been put in place, we probably would have had this issue diagnosed and a new control board put in within an hour to an hour and a half. Very
Wow.
simple access, very simple fix, and instead we ended up with, far more
Oh,
time
goodness.
and obviously cost,
Yeah.
in having to work around this. And so,
So
um go ahead.
Well, so to review, pulling a furnace, even from the inside, and even with these access holes, um, either manufacturer given or tech created, still involves unplugging or temporarily unhooking 12-volt wiring,
Yep.
and obviously the output ductwork. The input intake is kind of already there. That part's easy, but also a gas line at some point is going to need to be disconnected. Correct?
Yes. So there's a lot there was a lot more involved as soon as you talk about having to remove a unit.
Wow.
And sometimes, to be fair, even if you have your exterior access panel and you open it up, sometimes depending on the diagnosis of the issue, you still have to remove the unit. But then typically you can remove it right out that hole. And again, might have to go in back to gain access to maybe undo the gas connection or the 12-volt connections. But it's immensely easier. So, a couple things, and it was ironic. It was ironic. Literally the day after I fixed this, I happened to be perusing Facebook and one of the many forums on there, and somebody. I'm just going to say it. This is a Forest River Puma trailer, and someone was saying, "Hey, we really love the Forest River Puma trailer, and what are your thoughts about this?" And I just said, "Hey, just so you know, take a look at this and understand." At least and I don't even know if they were looking at the same model as the model I'd been working on, but and this is good. This is good information, not just for people that are thinking about buying a Forest River Puma, or but one of the things that you probably don't think about when you are buying an RV is, how do I access some of the things that when they fail? And I think you and I both suggest that RVers look at things as not if they will fail, but when they will fail.
When they will fail.
Because it's like a house. You live in a house long enough,
Yeah.
you're gonna have plumbing issues, you're gonna have furnace issues, you're gonna have air conditioning issues, right? But sometimes, here's again, you and I are both big proponents of doing inspections, both on new and pre-owned RVs before they're purchased. And here's where an RV tech, an RV inspector, might notice and say, "Hey, just so you know, there's no exterior access panel. You might want to think about the expense of adding that in, but let's make sure you can get it out from the backside." These are the sorts of things that technicians can look at. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. When I've done pre-purchase inspections for folks before, I can't help, though I'm a certified inspector and technician, I can't help as an inspector pointing out someday some technician's going to have a hard time with, fill in the blank, depending on how it's built.
yes, and in this case, there is absolutely no workaround, and also understand that because of these issues, it delayed the fix of the furnace for the client. So I think in the future, she's probably going to have the panel installed, and that way, if there's issues in the future, everything can be dealt with much more quickly, and it's one trip out probably to make the fix, rather
Yeah.
than dealing with these extended issues. So that was my first call of the week, and I wanted to share that. Joe, you have another call of the week, right? We're doing 2 calls a week each here. So what did you have next that was of interest to you?
Yeah, my next one will be pretty easy because I'm kind of going to verbally combine 3 or 4 calls that ironically have stacked up this week to all be effectively the same issue, and that is poor electrical connections. So, not necessarily an annual maintenance item, I don't really think, but something to be aware of when you start to have failing systems. It's always on the docket if you've got electrical problems. And so, like John was describing earlier, you can do amp tests, you can also test voltages. And specifically, to kind of describe my problem, I had 2 different water heaters this week that the board had 13.3 volts going on, good strong battery and or um, converter producing the nominal 12-volt charge. It was 13.3 coming onto the board, but
Nice and
then it
strong.
would,
Really,
yeah,
that's good.
exactly. But then you're expecting to see maybe 13.2 coming back off the board, going through the high temperature limit switches or thermocouples or emergency cutoffs or thermostats, depending on the system we're talking about. And then as kind of a safety check, and then back onto the board. And then we'll frequently leave the board, the signal voltage will leave the board again, then and go to a solenoid to start a burner or light an igniter or something like that. Anyway, my point is each time the signal 12-volt nominal here, 13.3-volt signal would go on or come off the board, I was losing anywhere from zero point 0.7 to 1.0, some cases more than 1 volt. So,
Wow, that's a lot.
uh, yeah, so 13.3 would come on and 12.5 or 12.3 would come off, go through a couple different checks, and then come back on at maybe 12.4, and then come back off again at 11.0 or something like that. And I said, man, is this a sign of a failing board? And it can be. That is a valid um, thought there, and could be a good diagnosis. But before you necessarily jump right to there, I was able to, in a couple different cases, pull the multi-pin connectors and spray them down with some special contact cleaner, make sure there's no corrosion on the contact. Sometimes they don't have to look terrible to actually be a high resistance connection. And anyway, pull them off, clean up the connectors, put them back on, and all of a sudden, hey, 13.3 volts is going on, 13.29 is coming off, going through its checks and going back in again, and we're losing less than zero point 0.1 volts now each time coming on and off the board. So just kind of ironic that I had a couple of those in a row. So I wanted to point that out.
So just those wiring connections, and that's not uncommon. Techs all the time have these sort of, I call them mystery fixes.
Yeah.
And quite often it's just simply checking connections that they are firm and tight, doing what we at Smart RV Podcast like to refer to as the Symmes wiggle test. You know, take
The
your wires and
SWT.
wiggle. There you go. Make sure they're tight and
Yeah.
clean, and they can happen at any time in any location. And you know, kind of on the annual maintenance side of things, if you will. Of course, this would depend greatly on the size of your rig and how much you want inspected and how deep. But looking at the controls for your water heater is very simple. You open up the panel, everything's right there. You can do a lot of things very quickly to make sure that your board is working right, the wiring is looking good, your safety systems are good. Same with the furnace if you have an exterior access panel. A lot of these sort of things can all be bundled together and you know given at least a decent look over by a technician within an hour to an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on how deep and how long you wanna go. But these are simple things that can save you the angst of waking up in the morning and not having hot water, or waking up in the middle of the night because your furnace has stopped. Again, you know, maintenance and service and having somebody look at these things can save you a lot of heartache.
Exactly. And just to kind of round it off with one last point, the many of these systems, these control boards, whether it's for a slide or refrigerator, a furnace, they'll have a logic circuit in it that once they get below a certain minimum voltage, they won't even attempt to light, run, or move. And sometimes that can be 10 and a half or more volts. So you'd be surprised at how you might end up flirting with that low end voltage with just a few bad connections and maybe a battery that's not all the way charged or a converter not putting out high output.
There you go. Okay, and then sort of kind of wrap up a lot of we're touching on 3 of the 4 major appliances, in RV world here with this last one, 'cause I'm talk briefly about refrigerators. You know, in the wintertime, we don't, you know, don't think too much about a refrigerator. It's just working and it's keeping
Yep,
things
yep.
cold. But come summertime, when all of a sudden you're losing food, because it's your refrigerator isn't working, and again, the back panel of a refrigerator should be removed at least once a year. It should be vacuumed out. You know, the wiring should be inspected. But if you, and I bring this up because I've done 2 cooling unit replacements in the past 6 weeks now, and this is on your absorption style refrigerator that can operate off of propane and electricity, as opposed to many of the newer refrigerators, which are 12-volt compressor. So I'm talking about the absorption style, and without getting all technical, you
But
have what's
real quick,
called a
the manufacturers will often refer to those compressor style as quote unquote residential refrigerators. And like John said, they can be
yes, they
12
will.
volt, they can also be 120, but the compressor style is what the manufacturer is talking about when he says a residential.
Yes, because the idea here is that it doesn't run off gas. It's always running off your 12-volt system in the rig, and whether you are plugged in at a campground or whether you're off grid, your battery is supplying the 12 volts to operate your 12-volt compressor slash residential refrigerator. But if you have a refrigerator that can operate on propane and electricity, you have an absorption style refrigerator. And this has been the technology and absorption refrigerators have been around for over 100 years. And you have a sealed unit that literally is fitted into this back compartment in the back of your refrigerator. It is a sealed unit. It has several different chemicals. The big two that you're going to notice if it fails is it has ammonia. So if you all of a sudden you have an ammonia smell in your rig and your refrigerator is not cooling, we know what the issue is. Also, if you open up that back panel, the bottom one, quite often you have two, but if you open the one that's at floor level from the outside, if you find yellow powder, that is sodium chromate that is also inside the system, and sodium chromate and or smell of ammonia, you're going to have a failed cooling unit. There is no fix. There is no recharging. Your only option then is to replace the entire cooling unit.
Yeah, the
And
cooling
that
unit is factory sealed for life, in other words.
Yes, it is. And RV techs do a lot of these. It's pretty routine. But I want our listeners to be aware that if you smell ammonia, or when as soon as if your refrigerator doesn't seem to be cooling, you want to go and look in that panel outside. Do you see any yellow powder or yellow residue? And what you're looking at then is a cooling unit replacement, which to obtain the unit, swap it all out. It's going to take a few days for that. The actual removal and replacement is going to take several hours. It's a pretty major job, but that's like the worst case scenario in an absorption style refrigerator. The good news is that they're easily replaceable by someone who's trained and experienced doing the work. But again, it's funny that they're going to break when they fail, I should say, when the cooling units fail, they don't necessarily wait until, July or August 1st in the 100-degree heat to fail. They can fail year round,
Yeah.
and they do. But if you're not familiar with how these systems work, that is the fix. So again, it's a good idea and this is not related to the cooling unit itself necessarily, but again, it's good, once, twice a year, three times, pull off that back panel, vacuum out the dust that's inside, or have a technician take a look at it. You do have your control board back there. I just had to replace a control board on a refrigerator because the AC, the 120 alternating current side was not working because there's a fuse that fits into the clips, and there were some scorch marks that the board had failed, so the 120 wasn't coming in. So in that case, I'll wrap up with this. The basic way these refrigerators work when you are plugged in is the board wants to run on the 120 volts AC. If for some reason there is not 120 volts AC coming in, it will automatically kick over and turn on the propane and open up the valve. The 12-volt circuit comes into play, and then you're going to have a burner which heats the chemicals. It's a fascinating thing where you use heat to create super cold to make your refrigerator cold. But again, it's good to inspect the board, inspect the wiring, because you have both the 120 volts AC, you have 12 volts DC back there, and that's something to think about. So, any questions on absorption style refrigerators, Joe, that our listeners might be asking themselves right now?
No, I like to tell my customers, like a lot of things in modern times, these new compressor style refrigerators are uh, better, faster, cheaper, lighter until they aren't. They work good, but once they break, there's a few things you can replace on those, and we'll go more in compressor style in some other episode. But they're much harder to work on. The older kind of, well, as John was indicating, 100-year-old, much older technology absorption type, they're not quite as reliable, but you will find a lot of parts are relatively easy to get to, easy to access, easy to work on. So there you go, kind of pros and cons of both styles.
There you go. And it's again not a question of if you're going to have issues with your refrigerator, but when. But you and I have both worked on rigs that are 20, 25, maybe even 30 years old, and their appliances are still working.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't failed in any way, shape, or form, which is pretty remarkable. But you know, another
A-
fascinating element within the RV
And
world.
by the same token, I have replaced a refrigerator in a less than a year old trailer also.
Well, there you go. And I'll also include some photographs of a couple of examples of the sodium chromate being visible in the back of the in the back of the refrigerator. I'll post them, so if you're watching us on YouTube, you can actually see it. But it's pretty obvious. It's going to be a yellow, either obvious yellow powder, or it will look like it can possibly look like corrosion, but it will be pretty bright yellow, or it will even look like a very thin layer. It looks like something yellow was poured on the wood, like it was a liquid, and then it sort of dried up. So, but yellow is not good. That's sodium chromate. So, well, hey, we've had a nice long episode, a little bit longer than usual. We hope our listeners have been enjoying this, and we are going to be back up on our annual weekly schedule of podcast releases. And again, Joe, if any of our listeners have questions they want to submit to us, what is our email address?
Yeah, they can contact us at smart-rv.com is our email address. So send emails your way or our way with your questions, comments, show requests, and I'll get them over to executive producer John Vanek and get them on the docket.
There we go. All right. Well, buddy, great to catch up with you. And we are looking so forward to 2026 and rolling out our Smart RV podcast episodes weekly. And we hope our listeners are enjoying this. Hey, until we talk next time, Joe, safe travels. And soon here, I think we'll be talking a little bit more, maybe more about what it's like being a tech, mobile RV tech, and we enjoy about it, and kind of how we run our businesses and the tools we use. And it'll be of interest, I think, to other mobile techs that are out there, but also our client, or excuse me, not our clients, but our listeners, to understand more about how mobile RV techs work.
Yeah, peek behind the curtain. That'd be great.
All right. Well, until next time, again, thank you all for joining us. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the important things on YouTube here to help us out. And we hope you enjoy our podcast. Joe, I salute you, sir. Happy 2026. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you, John. Take care and so long.
Good night.